Welcome to a new episode of our podcast, Lead the Future, Change the Conversation. An unedited and honest conversation to create the future. I'm Marjan Visser, futurist and your host, and join me as I chat to my friend Chris Harding on leadership, future, and peers. Chris is the founder of Inspired CEOs and an advisor to business owners who are ready to work on leadership, strategy, and long term success in life, business, and society. Welcome, Chris, in the
Thank
podcast.
you, I am.
That was a long term introduction, you. Long term success in life, business, and society. First question that pops to my mind is in our conversations, you mention self leadership a lot. So, what does self leadership mean to you?
Uh, well, probably it's meant different things throughout my life, right? Because life is never about staying in one place. I'd like to think that we're people who grow up and mature and discover deeper things about life. And there's definitely a difference between management and leadership. Leadership implies direction. It implies going somewhere. And so for me, when I think about self-leadership, I think the challenge is the idea that I have a responsibility to myself to become all that I can be. If I'm lucky, I'm going to be here for 90 years and life is pretty good most of the time. There's a lot to be explored and understood. And for me, I guess self-leadership is about becoming. And that requires a number of different things, doesn't it? It requires discovering more than I thought I knew. There's always more to discover, and I guess then choosing which of what I discover I'm actually going to put into practice and embody in my life and who I am and who I'm here to be. So yeah, I don't think there's a simple answer to the question.
Well, I'll try to dig a bit deeper with you. So, you mentioned leadership and management,
Yeah.
not to be confused because they're two different dimensions,
Yeah.
not even opposites. And you also talk about self leadership. Um, so, what does self leadership in the development stage that you mentioned you're ongoingly, like it's a continual learning process, what is in current stage of finding out who you are becoming? What are the ingredients or building blocks of the self leadership?
Um, so you won't be surprised to hear that I can be quite an intense person. I've been through some challenges in my life that maybe made me a bit more intense, made me someone who needed to try and make sense of certain things that didn't make sense to me. And so I'm wired to, if you like, map out reality. What's really going on here, and in the sense of self-leadership, one of the maps I have in my head is that I'm a four-dimensional person, right? I subscribe to the idea of body, mind, spirit in the world. So those are four different dimensions to how I show up. And so uh, in that sense, I think in my experience, uh, we all start out life thinking life is sequential. You go to grade 1 and then you go to grade 2 and grade 3, and then you keep progressing like it's just steps to the highest level. One of the things that I've really found interesting as I've become more curious about how the universe works and this whole concept of fractal reality is that it's not going somewhere step by step. It's kind of expanding. forever changing, and yet it's got some fundamental building blocks. And so I find it useful to understand what are the fundamental building blocks to me: body, mind, spirit, and the world. I find useful.
Yeah.
And so I try to work on all of those dimensions, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I hear self-regulation and self-reflection in what you actually already apply in your answer, and I hear those. I liked it. The four dimensions, like body, soul, spirit, but also a tangible physical reality that you called world.
Yeah, and an embodiment of it, if you like.
Yeah.
We all embody our own frameworks, don't we? Whether we realize it or not. Psychologists would talk about the unconscious mind and the conscious mind, and we find ourselves manifesting habits, not just habits of action, but habits of thought as well. I mean, it's interesting to realize that that's what's going on, because then I have more of a chance of cultivating a better me if I understand some of the invisible stuff that's going on. Making it visible really helps me.
Yeah. I think it helps others as well. Like like you said, they experience you, which is the demonstration of or the embodiment of that, the inner world, from all the way to from spirit to feelings to knowledge.
Yeah.
How do you or you already gave the answer partly, like they're not sequential, but to simplify it a little bit, what would be the sequence of those four elements? Does it start with knowledge, or does it start with spirit? How does that function?
What I find interesting is that there are lots of models out there to explain how it works, right? So if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, for example, he says, there's this foundational level of, physical survival, and then relationships and higher consciousness, and hopefully eventually you get to self-actualization. Now, the pattern of the world that we all grow up in would suggest that makes sense. And now we're living in an age where there's a lot of conversation about consciousness and manifestation and a whole different dimension to what's going on. Like I can just think it and it will happen. And in one sense, it's true. And in another sense, it's not. If you can't think it, you can't articulate it. If you can't articulate it, you can't enact it. That is true. But there's no magic of, if I just think it, if I just think myself rich, I will become rich. And yet there is a truth that if I think about what I really want, at least when it's coming towards me, I'll notice it. I'll notice what matters and what doesn't matter. And I can start to put things together in a way that builds the life I want to have. So, I think the best picture I have is, to my mind, it might look like a hierarchy, because it's really nice to have a hierarchy where I can identify what is the most important thing, as if the most important thing triggers everything else. But that model of what the quantum field looks like. You have these like three circles, all with their own orbit around a nucleus of energy.
Yeah.
I think it's more dynamic. I think it's more like that life is dynamic, and that if you don't work on your conscious mind enough to know what's really going on, it only takes you so far, as Albert Einstein said. If each of those dimensions will only take you so far to the level at which you've developed them. Unless you work on them to develop them further, you get stuck. Which is why it comes back to the idea that I think self-leadership for me is about taking responsibility for this gift called life and making the most of it.
So to switch from self-leadership as a focus point, as a priority, as actually owning it,
Yeah.
what would be a setup for you to accelerate it, to keep learning and not just be navel staring?
Um, well, if I think that my life is really summed up by how well I perform in the world as we know it, then it just becomes about adding more information and skills to improve my performance.
Yeah,
But
that's not what you believe.
well, it's not really what's going on, right? Yes, if I increase my performance in the world, then I can get more stuff that appeals to my ego or whatever. But experiencing life is in more than one dimension. It's not just, that's one way of knowing how well I'm doing, but there's the emotional me, there's the psychological me, there's the spiritual me. There's lots of ways in which I experience this thing we call life. And I try to pay attention to all of them.
Yeah.
Rather than putting one of them above the other, because all of them seem to work together to, to deliver this experience like we call life.
Yeah. So what is your thought about, besides that, living from inside out, with, like you said, with the atom, with the multiple dimensions, the dynamic around it, which we all know there is some kind of cause. It's not just, it didn't just happen. There is a design in it, just looking at how it moves around the atom. But that living from the inside out, do you just experiment with that in a context to the world, or do you develop yourself also in a like an inner circle, like we talk a lot in the podcast about peers? Do you value that dimension of development?
Yeah, look, I think if all you want is answers to questions, that's what Google is for.
Yeah.
But if you want better questions, then in my experience, they very rarely arise out of your own mind. They arise out of some spark from some other, very often from some other conversation, where you're presenting how you see the world, how you perceive yourself, how you think about what your business is for, and all those kinds of important things. But very often it's in conversation where someone else with a different perception and a different way of articulate it makes you go, oh, okay, I've not seen that before. And they're looking at the same thing from another place, and it helps you to get a richer picture of what's really going on. So yeah, I mean, I for many years now have been committed to showing up as a part of a peer mentoring group. Well, it's more a peer discovery group, to help me not just learn new things, but sharpen my thinking and sharpen the questions I even dare to ask about what's possible here.
Yeah.
Because if I just wanted information, I would Google it. I want better questions.
I think that connects to the four dimensions you said already. Like, it's not sequential, and if you would Google it, you have to think about it first. So that means that the knowledge trigger or the knowledge gap is the trigger, and in many cases it could be just what you sense and have no language for. So,
Yeah,
like you said, I think that I like that part. You say it's I need the questions to continue developing, but I'm not. In most of the cases, I'm not the one that formulates the question. So I need those peers around me to ask me the brutal, honest, uncomfortable questions
yeah,
um, that trigger random thoughts that start to connect.
yeah. Because I think it's helpful to acknowledge that as human beings we're wired for convenience. Okay, but we know that is it the human brain consumes about 30% of our energy.
Mm,
Um, so even the human brain is wired to rely on what it thinks it knows in order to conserve energy. But if you're not careful, that just holds you back, right? So that kind of there's lots of ways you could think about it. If you want to get fitter physically, go to sign up to the gym. Even better, go to the gym. Even better, hire a trainer. Even better, set yourself a goal that I'm going to run a marathon. It's no different with the mind. How do I expand my capability or my consciousness, if that's the word you want to use, of understanding more clearly the reality we're living in? It's very
mm,
hard to do on your own. Very hard.
yeah. Well, to wrap it up, I want to thank you, Chris, for the honest answers and deep insights about that self leadership is not just a linear process, but it is essential for leading others. And you need others around you to fuel that development with the questions. So I want to just finish for those who are listening to our podcast. If you have any questions, just use the options to direct message or comment with questions, but also make use of the invitation to just sit in a mastermind as a guest, as a peer group of fellow leaders, entrepreneurs that want to find their voice. So the link to just get more information is and get a call to be introduced to it, to prepare you as a guest, is businessrevivalist.com/mastermind/guest. Just make use of it and discover what a peer group could mean for your personal development.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you, Arjan. Really
We
nice.
stayed within the 20 minutes, which is a new record for us as enthusiastic pioneers of leadership. I hope I can welcome you soon in the podcast again
I'd love that.
to take it one step further of leading the future and changing the conversation. So thank you very much, and till next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.